super excited, and we just thank you for being here because we love making this connection. Awesome. So with that, I have a couple of really quick announcements that I want to do, and then we're going to segue over to our spotlight speaker, which we're super excited about. So members, you have a chance to upload your images to Vertical Space Magazine. This is super cool. How many times we're talking about being out in amazing locations? Well, now you get a chance to upload those great images. So I'm going to provide you with a link for that. And then also, if you are interested in attending, you know, we've been sharing about the CES coming up and the Women to Watch. Well, if you're interested in attending that, I have a link for that as well. So much exciting things happening, and I love it. So I am going to share those into the chat, and I'm going to segue over to Rebecca. She is with Drone Deploy. I have been counting down the days for this one because I love Drone Deploy and have been flying with that mapping program. Share and make you spotlight. Hi, Rebecca.
See my face real big now. Thank you, Desi and Kim and Sharon for having me. And thanks everyone for being here. This is really fun. And I'm excited about all those speakers coming up. So you got a really good schedule ahead.
Awesome. Yes, exciting stuff. All right. So do you have a presentation that you want to share? And can we just kind of kick things off a little bit with you just sharing how you got into the industry and how you got where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. And I actually put a few visuals to that. So maybe I should start sharing my slides.
Okay.
But really getting involved with you all was really just kind of through probably a lot of you, just organic reaching out. And I've loved all the events you do and just kind of this casual get together nature. It's hard to have that right now, as we all know. So thanks for all that you're doing. And loved all those awesome visuals we saw on people's backgrounds as well. So yeah, I kept things pretty simple, but should I go ahead and share a couple slides?
You go right ahead.
All right. So when I was thinking about this, I took it back to, I guess this was in here. Let me make sure this is the right size. You can see the whole, yeah. So when somebody out there was in Colorado, I think Eric or somebody was in Colorado here.
Vic Moss. He's in Colorado.
Yeah. So I don't know if you know this location.
What kind of fog is that, everyone?
Cold fog. That looks like up near Aspen.
Yeah, close. So it's across over near Crested Butte, and this is a little research station that I did I got an internship in college and worked out here. And these are all little old mining houses, and they've turned into a research station. So there's a bunch of ecologists who go out here and study alpine meadows.
Oh, cool.
And it's called Gothic, Colorado. Which is kind of a funny name. So we were studying, alpine meadows, similar to that photo on the right, and using these really kind of jerry-rigged gas and flux measurements to learn how much these plants were photosynthesizing and respiring throughout the day, to get an idea of the net productivity of these meadows. And the studies are all really longitudinal. So we're looking at crazy long, for this, it was like 20 years of measurements in the same areas throughout the growing season to look at changes. And, a lot of this is around climate change and how these really high alpine environments are some of the first kind of indicators of broader changes in the ecosystem. But as you can see on the left, it's a pretty involved system. So we're going out there with this giant tarp and putting it together at each site, dragging a chain around the outside of it. We've got 4 people there. We go out in the morning and right at dusk to get the respiration measurements. And it's kind of like intense work and beautiful, but it's a lot of time and effort. So when I was out there, we started using up in the right, a plant cam. And this was kind of the first time I'd seen this more remote type of measurement. So we were, instead of, or in addition to what we were doing, it's just one camera, you put it out there the whole season, and it's taking continual measurements, and we can take those photos and get an idea of the greenness of the field. And turns out the greenness is a pretty good indicator for net productivity. So it's, taking something that's super involved and using these more remotely sensed data types to kind of shrink that process down a lot, and get more simple data. So that really fascinated me. And I went on to do some more work on that. So I was at NASA doing this program that I think Rachel, who's on this call, did too, called NASA Develop. And we are working in the Virgin Islands using satellite data. They just sent up the newest Landsat satellite on a rocket yesterday, which is exciting. So we'll have more granular data. But we were looking at land changes in the Virgin Islands and doing some classification of different Sentinel and Landsat imagery. And it was a really neat project. And obviously there's some issues with using Landsat data where the squares or the level of detail you can get is still quite coarse. So that got me excited about GIS, and I worked at Esri for a bit. And then here on the right, I'm out in Colorado at Drone Deploy. That was flying some drones, and got me really interested in this, fine scale data that we get from drones and how that can be used. So that's a brief summary of my background. And I'll just say, before we all got here, Desi asked me what interested me about Drone Deploy. And I think so I came on as the social impact program manager. So I'm managing our nonprofit program, disaster response, and education. And this is a quote from Mike, our CEO, and really the reason the company started and how they got the idea for it was they're all from South Africa, and we're looking at the issues of poaching in Kruger National Park there, and saw drones as a really interesting tool to help see things from a totally different angle and give the rangers more leverage against poachers. And obviously, there's a lot of other issues around poaching, but it's a story that still stays true to the company, and that they're in this to make a positive difference in the world. And that's really what got me excited about the role and the work here. So I thought that might be a second to pause and just see if there's any questions.
Every good company begins with an amazing why. And
yeah,
right there, Mike wins why. It doesn't have to be it's just, that's so awesome,
Yeah.
And,
It's really neat. And I think it's so much else came from that, but to have that initial spark is pretty exciting.
Yeah, see what it's grown into. That's just, how many of you knew that this was Drone Deploy's why?
I did not.
Isn't that awesome? Like, this is where it all started, and now we're using Drone Deploy, and it's just amazing. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Rebecca. That's inspiring.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more about social impact in the work we're doing. And I'm sure many of you have felt the truth of this beautiful comic over the last year and a half. I definitely did when I was inside from COVID, but then also we actually had active wildfires out the window. So there was literal smoke, as well as all of the other challenges we're facing. So that's really kind of, there is a little bit of a fire under us of how we can accelerate change and start moving forward on a lot of different things: racial injustice, climate change, and let me just go to the next slide. So here we have a couple different images, and on the left we've got some farming. We've still got 700 million people living in extreme poverty, struggling to get food. We've got 1.6 billion people that lack adequate housing, and we've lost 2/3 of all wildlife over the last 50 years. So there's some pretty extreme challenges we're facing right now, and I definitely feel more existential in many days than usual. And so to fill that, we need accelerated solutions. And that's where I think we have this huge opportunity with this new technology we're using. So when we look at, the industrial revolutions of our time, we're now kind of in this fourth stage of AI, IoT, digital, and drone technology. And that's pretty exciting. So the question I posed for this, and a lot of what fuels the work that I do and we do at Drone Deploy every day, is how can drones accelerate social impact? So how can we use this new technology that is part of this new revolution to make positive change in the world? And I've highlighted a couple different stories that I think are really exciting from organizations we work with. And they all kind of hit on one of these themes. So measuring what matters, doing more with less, involving community in your work, being transparent, reducing risk, and focusing on outcomes as ways to accelerate social impact. And so I'm going to jump into those stories, but happy to pause again if you all have any questions as I've shifted gears from the personal to kind of the larger, what are the issues we're working on.
So if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to put those into the chat. And I'm excited to hear how you're taking these matters and moving forward with them.
Yeah. Great. So the first story I wanted to highlight was OpenStreetMap Uganda. And so up in the top here, you can see this is the executive director, Deo, and he's out here with a huge group of people showing them drones. And this is a really interesting project where they're going out and mapping communities that have faced flooding. And these are often really remote areas of the country. And so communities in these areas, there's two things that are really interesting about this. One is we don't often have good counts of when there is a disaster, how many people were affected and what is the extent of damage. So oftentimes it's hard to reach. If there is flooding, you can see some of these areas, they're in water in big rain boots, and they need to get out there and understand the extent of damage so that the proper amount of funding can go out and start alleviating the issues. What they've done a really amazing job of is involving the community in this entire process. And really, drones can be, if they're not introduced and accepted by the folks living there, a pretty scary thing to have a drone flying through if you don't know what it's about and why it's there. They do a ton of communication up front. They work with the Red Cross, who has relationships with the communities there. And when they get there, the real change is that the people who live in the area are now helping the organization figure out where is the damage and telling them, you need to fly over here. This is where most of the damage is, or it looks fine from the road, but when you come back this way, you'll see how many other buildings were affected. So I think that's a really interesting story, and they're able to help kind of put communities on the map so that they're able to get the resources they need. I shared this before, but they do so they are part of the OpenStreetMap community, and they do some digitization efforts. So if anybody's interested in getting involved with them, they have some volunteer events coming up where you can help digitize maps that they've made, often with drone imagery. Measure what matters. So this is a really interesting story from Dr. Baldwin, which some of you know. I know she's a part of this group as well. And another story, you know, in the research field, they're going out and measuring these large piles, which you can see on the bottom left of sargassum, which is coming into Caribbean environments and really having an impact on tourism as well as fisheries, because the fish get caught in these, and it's harder for the fishers to go out. And then, you know, it's just a lot of seaweed on the beach, and that also has an impact on tourism. So she's part of an effort across the Caribbean to measure the amount of this seaweed on the beaches. And from that, they're able to figure out how, if they can go out and collect it and then turn it into, you know, seaweed products, or if it's dry, where is it, and how can we get rid of it? And so with Drone Deploy, they've actually used our, I think this is really interesting. So we have a tool for construction to figure out how much of an area, like if you have a pile of a silo or a pile of dirt, how much of it there is in a certain area. So you're just kind of clicking around and creating a volume measurement. So they're doing the same thing along the beach to figure out the volume of seaweed. So they're instead of going out in the field for hours and doing something like this, they're doing that all from drone imagery and really speeding up the process. Okay, so my third story is on doing more with less. And this is in the Central African Republic. It's an organization called Water for Good. And they're a nonprofit that's focusing on bringing reliable drinking water to a much greater part of the population. Current estimates are that 30% that's a conservative estimate of the population has reliable drinking water. And without it, you're often spreading disease and through waterborne illnesses and issues like that. And so to plan something like this, so you can see up in the right, there's a silo here full where they're pumping water from the ground. They usually would go out and survey and you know, have a survey team put down points in the ground and decide, you can see on the left here where those routes are going to go to access points. So what they're doing is creating drone maps of this area, and then they have one set of data. So instead of having you know, having to go back out if something changes, they can adjust these plans of distribution points on the fly and from a remote location, because the road systems there, they said, are just terrible. So, you know, getting out to a place can take 3 to 5 days just getting there. And then, you know, back to involving community, they're using these drone images to figure out where the population is and estimates from buildings, because there's not a lot of maps in this area. There's not really good estimates on even how many people live there. So using that and with kind of community buy-in and conversations, they're placing these in more reasonable places where people will want to go and get water. So they had an amazing statistic, and I think it was like 30% of water projects in sub-Saharan Africa are functioning, which is, and you know, because they haven't had this kind of more involved process, whereas theirs are at 95% of their water points are functioning and use, which is just a really neat practice. And you know, a huge story of just doing more in terms of like they're able to now, I think they said they're saving 80 days of work in the field by using these remote maps and mapping the area. And then another interesting story about that was that often, just because they have these maps, it sparks a lot of other conversations with cities and other NGOs that they're working with who don't have the data, and they're able to share that with them. Okay, so we're on to our fourth story, and this is on being transparent. So this is an organization, and I don't know if you've all been to Chicago or other rivers where there's, you know, a lot of cities have the backs of their buildings are to the river, and rivers used to be this main point of travel and commerce, and now they're kind of sitting vacant and often polluted. So they are working to revitalize the river along Chicago and other areas over time, and using drone mapping to get an idea of the area and make plans that they can share with different interest groups. And a lot of this is about, you know, involving their stakeholders and sharing what something might look like. So people can say, oh, we're a rowing group and we actually use this area. And if you put trees in there, I can't, do my rowing practices. Or we're a business in this area and we are really interested in helping to contribute once you see what that vision looks like. So they're able to use maps. You can see one printed out in the bottom here. And then also, they make these kind of larger from above renders of what it's going to look like once that's project is in place. So this is a nonprofit called TECO, and I'm highlighting them because they focus a lot on the outcomes of what their work is going to provide for the communities they're working with. I had some statistics on it. I don't think they're up on the slide, but this is about undercounting the urban poor who live, and this is favelas, which are really common around Sao Paulo. So in communities that aren't properly mapped, we don't know the number of people who live there, and it's harder to provide those basic necessities. So they're using maps to, to create high resolution images, and then using some machine learning to be able to see how many buildings there are. And from that, you can estimate how many people live in those buildings. And they and they're also building a lot of houses there to permanent structures that are more stable and are going to withstand different environmental challenges. So they call this, bottom up, where we're going up to the government and saying, hey, this is the new numbers on how many people are actually in this area that was previously undercounted. And last one I wanted to show is kind of in the new age era. And so this is Spot, as you all know, a ground robot, and it's about reducing risk. So up here we see an image actually taken from the Christchurch earthquake that happened quite recently in New Zealand. And there is a really famous church there that they were unable to get inside, and they used the robot to actually, and I'll see if I can play this video a little bit, to actually go inside the building and get some information on what is the level of damage and be more safe about collecting that information. So I think there's a lot of stories that I hear when talking to different nonprofits about reducing risk, whether it's something like this, which is pretty cool, and getting into the new age of ground robotics, but also with drones. You have a lot of organizations who are going into remote areas and maybe putting themselves at risk to get data on a land trust and a forested area, and being able to fly a drone is kind of a neat tool that can make you feel safer in the field, so you're not being in a dangerous environment yourself. And so this is a really neat story about that in practice. And yeah, to sum that up, a couple different stories there, but going back, we do have something that I think about a lot is the Sustainable Development Goals, and we've got a long way to go to improve the lives of everyone here and make our globe and our lives sustainable, so that we can keep living in this awesome earth. And I think that new technology like drones is going to be so important to be able to accelerate our ability to reach these goals. And so one thing that people often say is think global, act local. And I think with drones, we often flip that around because we're really looking at the local data. So up at the top, we see this is a land trust, part of the Nature Conservancy up in Montana, and they're giving ranchers a payment for maintaining prairie dog populations on the land, as well as some other practices. But they're to do this, they used to go out on foot and walk around and try and find the size of these prairie dog. These volcanoes show where they are, which is kind of their pop out points. And there's, satellite data or aerial data wasn't giving them the resolution they needed to be able to see that type of information. So kind of flipping it on his head and thinking about what we can do locally to make a difference. And obviously that'll all spin up to those global goals and that as well. And that's all I had for you, just a little, overview of some different cool use cases. And hopefully that got you all thinking about all the different ways drones can be used. And I just love these stories. That's one of the best parts of my job, is hearing how many different nonprofits are just kind of taking this technology to the max and using it in ways that can really make a difference in their communities.
Yes, and Eric even put a comment in there about nice work, and so there is hope for the world, and it
Bravo,
is amazing.
bravo,
It
yes.
is amazing to see it. And so, okay, so can you share what is your favorite story? Being around it so often, you hear amazing things, and it may be hard to actually pinpoint it down to one. But what is one of the most highlighted ones in your mind?
He has one.
Let me see. I have to think of one I haven't told you.
All of the above.
I think one that's super exciting is in terms of like getting to places you can't usually, all of the studies that are being done of coral reefs with drones. So there's a lot of nonprofits and researchers that are able to do something they never thought possible of remotely sensing. I've done that, gone scuba diving and trying to figure out what a coral reef looks like. It's not the simplest way to look at a landscape. So using drones to map coral reefs, we've actually got the AIMS, the Australia Institute of Marine Science, is using drone deploy to map the entire Great Barrier Reef, which is a pretty huge project. So I love ocean environments, and those stories always get me.
Ah, awesome. Yeah. Awesome. It's amazing to see the different ways. And so let's talk a little bit about drone deploy itself and using it for mapping. And can you share a little bit about how people can utilize it in maybe the functions of the program? I know you mentioned earlier about the volumetrics. Yeah. Can you share? It could be that some people have already used the program. And
yeah,
myself, I love drone deploy.
No, I was just looking at all these comments on Spot. I know. I'm excited, Vic, if you get to go to Boston Dynamics, that would be really neat. Yeah, so what I see as the benefit for nonprofits is if you do, and it's always a trade-off, but the main difference is that it's a cloud product, so you're processing not on your own computer. So for example, with OpenStreetMap Uganda, they weren't getting data back in a time that they could make choices. So they were getting, when they were processing on a desktop, on a laptop, they got the data back because they were processing so much imagery in like around 5 days. And for disaster response, that's sometimes not quick enough. And it was expensive. They were trying to spend a lot of money to get a computer that they could process on. So I think that's a big benefit for organizations working in areas where they have limited resources, is using a cloud product for that. And something else I'd say is just having one simple system. I worked at Esri before, and it's an amazing software, but there's so many different pieces to it. And one thing that's really awesome is just talking to people who get it the moment they open it and they know what they're supposed to do. And that takes a huge lift off nonprofits as well. And in teaching and in disaster response to have the software not be a barrier to start using it. So yeah, that's what I love about it. And I like that you can do it all in one system as well, from the flight planning to the processing and all that.
Awesome. So does anyone have any questions that they want to pop into the chat? I know we're kind of running short on time, so I want to make sure that if we have a chance, got a couple of those thank yous popping in there. And well, Jim had a
Yeah.
question about where can regular users, actually, Jim, if you wanted to unmic and ask your question, you're welcome to.
Sure, thanks very much. Great presentation, Rebecca. Thank you so much. And I know this isn't my question is probably not in your wheelhouse, but as a regular user of Drone Deploy, I have a couple needs and questions, and I'm having a difficult time finding answers and or support. Like if you go to the Facebook page, you can post a question and
interesting.
doesn't seem to get answered. So where does somebody go?
The best place to go is support@dronedeploy.com.
Okay.
So anybody who has the software, I mean, I actually think they're amazing. So you'll hear back within a day with a response to whatever you've got going on. And you can CC me on that. So you make sure I can send you my email too. So you make sure you get a response there. There is also a user forum. So online, but I don't think Facebook is probably going to be the biggest hitter.
It probably isn't.
So they have chat support as well. So you can do chat or email. And then if you have the enterprise, then it's like phone calls as well.
All right. Excellent.
And they're pretty quick. Yeah.
Awesome.
So there is a user forum where you might see other people have asked questions that might be related, but and it is monitored but that's, if you don't want to talk to support, you could also look at that.
Awesome. So just to kind of summarize, a lot of the comments coming up into the chat is just that the value that you have for the humanitarian needs and the use cases that you're using it for are just phenomenal. I think Eric would like you to consider running for an office. So Greg, go ahead and unmic and ask your question, and then I've got just a little bit more time and we'll wrap it up and do our breakout sessions.
Briefly, a mechanical question. For example, monitoring the poaching in Africa, what are the drone models that you are using? Which ones are you flying there?
Yeah, so that park was an interesting use case. So obviously not all drone use is good. And over time, they were having a lot of, actually, I think this poaching issue is quite interesting because there's a couple things going on. One is that there was a lot of people from the public flying drones and tourists. And so that park specifically actually ended up banning drones. Within the poaching world, there was a bit of an arms race and still going on where there's just this technological back and forth between the poachers and the land managers there. But some of the solutions I've seen successful are with like heat mapping, so using thermal cameras on drones.
And are you flying Matrice or DJIs or what are you flying there?
So currently we are no longer flying in the Kruger National Park, if that's the answer to that. But in terms of different we fly with DJI as well as Skydio.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's other areas within East Africa that we are like working on those issues, but it's like I'm sure the regulations really do change country to country and area to area. So it's all about what solution makes sense for the problem at hand.
Good.
Awesome.
It's great work. Thank you.
Yes, fantastic presentation. So before we jump into our breakout sessions, one last comment. So Drone Deploy has a conference coming up.
Yes, we do. So we have, so one thing I forgot to mention is that, so we do have both a nonprofit program and a disaster response program. So those provide discounted software for nonprofits. And then, just like if you are in a crisis response, you get free software to to work on that. So definitely check that out. And yeah, we have a conference coming up next month and would love to see you all there. We've got a session that Sharon is going to be in on diversity and inclusion in the drone industry. We've got the Nature Conservancy presenting on their environmental like how they're using drones in different land management practices, and a lot of really cool features also are going to be released and talking about this ground robotics solution. So that's that'll be a neat event.
Yeah, so I think I grabbed the link if anybody wants to check that out. So exciting to be there coming up next month. And so, well, Rebecca, fantastic. I know everyone is truly inspired by what you had to share with us today. And it just makes it so heartfelt. And so we just really appreciate that you've come and shared with us this morning. And so,
yeah, and thanks. And if you all are working with any nonprofits and want to get them set up, just reach out and I'm happy to have a conversation with them. And you.
Awesome. And you put your contact information into the chat, or was that just this?
Yeah, I think I did, but I can do it again.
Okay.
We got a hot chat over here. It's good.
Yeah, we do. Everybody's
We're a chatty
I
bunch.
didn't actually put in my
Chatty
right
bunch.
email, so.
Yeah, we are.
We're multitaskers. So what I loved about your presentation, Rebecca, is that you echo the mission. You echo the why. I love that. I love the why. It's very powerful. It just inspires people when you can echo that why instead of being so technical and mechanical. Like that all comes afterwards, but you have to have that original inspiration. And the drone deploy Win, who owns it, he's definitely blessed to have you representing him.
Well, and I think, we have to be in it for the broader, greater good, no matter what company you're at, especially when we're facing, if this year didn't show it, I don't know what will, that we need to be able to use this, and we're like, it's a small industry still, like we're the people figuring this out. So we've got a lot of onus on us to make sure this technology is used for good, especially given where it started in military uses. So there's a lot of growth that we can have here.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us and inspiring. That kind of wraps it up.